Thank you for joining us today for this life-changing message from River of Life. If you are ever in our area, we would love for you to join us. For more information, visit us at rolcrawfordville.com. That's rolcrawfordville.com. Or download our app in the App Store under ROL Crawfordville. Now, let's join Pastor Derricke as he teaches from the Word of God.
All right, so we are in 2026. I want to welcome everyone tonight to our Wednesday night Bible study. Of course, as you all probably know, because we've been announcing it like crazy for the last few weeks, is tonight we're going to start our study in the book of Revelation. Now, a couple things before we go. I've just entitled this tonight, Foundations. Okay, and there's a couple reasons for that, and I'll say it in just a moment. I want to give a little bit of credit before I get started. There are a couple of commentaries that I've used. Not that it matters, I just want to give them credit. One is the book of Revelation by a guy by the name of Robert Mounts, who I've got a lot of respect for. And then the other, he's still alive and still teaching today. The other one is a book called Studies in Revelation by a guy by the name of J. Hampton Keithley, who I think died in 2002. But both of these I've been relying on a lot for some different information. So I just wanted to kind of give them credit up front. Now, anytime we start a new study in a book, whether it's Hebrews or John or Ephesians or whatever, there's always a certain amount of groundwork that you have to lay, right? You want to, who wrote it, when they wrote it, where were they at, what was the context, what was the culture, those kind of things. And so that's true for any book. But when it comes to the book of Revelation, this is especially true, because this book is certainly different from other New Testament books. So I'm going to just tonight cover several different things. We're not going to really get into the verses. We'll look at a couple verses tonight, but for the most part, I want to talk about how we're going to interpret the book. I want to talk about prophecy and some different things just to lay the groundwork for next week when we come back and actually do an initial introduction and step into verses 1 through 8. So let's first understand the book of Revelation. What kind of book is it? Well, it's actually two different types of books. The first thing it is that it is a pastoral letter. In the same way that Corinthians or Thessalonians or Ephesians, they are pastoral letters. This is a pastoral letter as well. If you go back to the first century, there was a very specific way when you wrote a letter, just like today. We write a letter, what do we say? Dear so-and-so, right? And we write the letter. Well, back in the first century, there was a very specific way that you wrote a letter. So you would give your name, you would tell, okay, whom I'm writing to, and then you would bring some type of greeting. So you see this in all the New Testament letters, and you also see it here in the book of John. In Revelation 1, 4 through 5, you see John say this. He says, John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia, grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and is to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness, the firstborn of the dead and the ruler of the kings of the earth. So he's saying, I'm the one who's writing, this is who I'm writing to, and then he gives a formal greeting. So Revelation first is a pastoral letter written by John to 7 churches in a region in that day called Asia Minor, which is modern day Turkey. So we'll get more into this a little bit later. If you don't know where modern day Turkey is, I put a map on the left so you can kind of see where Israel is, and you got Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, and just to the north of that is modern day Turkey. So that is where all 7 churches were located. By the way, we know exactly where these cities are. They've been excavated. We found out, we got a lot of information about them, and we'll talk about these when we get more into the individual letters to the different churches. So the first thing it is a pastoral letter. The second thing it is biblical prophecy. Now we know that because the book itself calls itself a word of prophecy. Revelation 1:3 says this, "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near." So you can see right here in the 3rd verse, it says the words of this prophecy. Not only that, when you get to the end of the book, Jesus himself says this, "And behold, I'm coming soon. Blessed is the one who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book." Now that, we may not think that's important, but it is. It's important that we know that this is a prophetic book, and I'll tell you why here in just a bit. Now, we're going to talk more about prophecy in a little bit as we move forward, but I want to remind you of something that's very important. Biblical prophecy is never just about telling us the future. We're not given prophecy just so that we can know what the future holds. Now, it certainly does that, but prophecy is given to us to motivate us now. And we're going to see that. One of the reasons that he tells us what's coming is to motivate you now to live a certain way. And this is particularly true with Revelation. Let me tell you, I could boil the book down right now to 2 words: Jesus wins. It's just that simple. I mean, it really is just that simple. You know what the book of Revelation is about? Jesus wins. At the end of the day, He will conquer Satan. He'll conquer evil. He'll conquer the forces of darkness, and victory will come to the church. It's just that simple. Now, there's a lot of detail in there and things that we can talk about, but the fact is Jesus wins, and that's what we need to take away from it. Now, let's talk a little bit about who wrote it, when they wrote it, and where they were when they wrote it. Now, we just read verse 4 where it says, "I, John," and so we know that the author of the book itself is a man by the name of John. Now, traditionally, the church has passed down through various letters and things like that this is John the apostle. This is the same John who Peter and Peter and James and John. That same John who wrote the book, the Gospel of John. The same John who was with Jesus as he walked on this earth. This is that apostle John. Now, we know this from the early church fathers, men like Irenaeus and Clement and Eusebius. They tell us that John actually settled in Ephesus. He was arrested and exiled to the island of Patmos, where he wrote the book of Revelation. Now, I specifically highlighted a guy by the name of Irenaeus. And the reason I highlighted this guy is for a very particular reason. Irenaeus was a disciple of Polycarp, and Polycarp was a disciple of the Apostle John. So he is very, very close to John. In other words, he had contact with somebody that knew the Apostle John personally. So when Irenaeus passes information down to us, we're going to listen, right? Because he was in a very unique position. Now, he wrote a book around 150, 160 AD called Against Heresies. And in that book, he tells us that John wrote Revelation while he was on the island of Patmos at the end of the Roman Emperor Domitian's reign. Now, we know the Emperor Domitian reigned from 81 to 96 AD. So we know that he wrote it during that time frame. Most people will tell us it's around 95 AD. That's probably the most accepted date of when he wrote it. So he wrote it, and he's exiled on the Isle of Patmos. By the way, one of the most beautiful things about this book that we're going to read is you can go to all these places today. I still love that about the Bible. You know, you open the Book of Mormon and there's all this stuff there and there's none of it exists anywhere, right? You open the Bible and you can just go to those places today. You can go into the amphitheater where Paul was pulled in. You can go and walk some of the roads that Paul walked. You can go to the Isle of Patmos today. You can go to the different cities like Smyrna, and those places are still there. They're excavated. You can go see them today. And I just think that's so amazing that this is a living Bible. It's living history. And so I put a little yellow dot there. You can see on the right over there is Turkey. You can kind of see where the churches are located. And then right out off in them little islands is a little island called Patmos. And we'll talk more about that as we come by next week. Now, here's there's really two things I want to talk to you about tonight. And the first one is, how do you interpret this book? Okay, how do you interpret this book? Now, I've mentioned this a couple times on Sundays, and I want to say this again because this has been very important. The purpose or the intent of the book is stated right off the bat. In Revelation 1:1, it says the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, that word revelation is the Greek word apocalypsis. Now, the word apocalypsis means an unveiling, a disclosure, a revealing. It's like something that's got a veil over it, and you take that veil off so that everybody can see what's under it. That's what this word means. It's something that was previously hidden, and now it's been revealed to everybody. Now, do you see the irony in that, right? The fact is, it's not meant to be mysterious. It's not meant to obscure. It's made to reveal. And the irony of it is that we see this book as an enigma. We see it as hard to understand. We see it as mysterious, but it's not meant to be that way. It's meant to be an unveiling or a revealing. Now, the question is, why is that? Why is this book that says this is an unveiling, a revealing of Jesus Christ, why in the world do so many people look at it and think, man, I've got no idea what that stuff means? Well, the reason is because two things. First of all, it contains so much symbolism, right? Anytime something contains a lot of symbolism, then what's going to happen is you're going to have different types of methods of interpretation. Some people are going to come at it from one direction. Some people are going to come at it from a different direction, and you're going to end up with all this different stuff, and it's just going to confuse everybody. And after a while, people are just going to say, you know what, I don't even want to read that. I don't think we got any chance of that. But that's not what it's intended to do. Okay? So what I want to do tonight for just a few minutes is I want to look at the four methods that are used to interpret this book. And I'm going to tell you which three we're not going to use, and I'm going to tell you why, and then I'm going to tell you the one that we are going to use. And so the first method that people have used to interpret this book is something called the allegorical method. Now, an allegory is something that we probably should know what it is. It's a story where the story it's not really about what the story's about, right? In other words, you've got characters, you've got places and stuff, but they represent something else. It's not really a story about a rabbit and a turtle in a race. Are you with me? It's not really about that. It means something else. That's what an allegory is. Now, we've got examples of allegories. Some of you may have read the Chronicles of Narnia. You know, in that you've got Aslan the lion. He's not a lion. He represents Jesus Christ. And you know that as you're reading the story. Animal Farm, The Tortoise and the Hare, Pilgrim's Progress is a very famous allegory. So it's a story that's got characters and places and different things that happen, but they all represent something else. And you know that going in. When Revelation is interpreted that way, what happens is somebody opens a book, and they say, well, this doesn't really mean what it says. You know, when it says he saw a beast, that's not really a beast. Or when he says he saw an angel, that's not really an angel. When he says there was a plague, that's not really a plague. It represents something else. So you're always, everybody with me? You're always looking for this hidden meaning. Robert Mount says, when you do this, Revelation just becomes a theological poem representing the age's struggle between the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. In other words, if you try to interpret Revelation this way, every prophecy you read, it's not a real event that's going to happen sometimes in the future. It's just symbolic of the age-old struggle between darkness and light, or good and evil. So symbols in the book are not tied to specific events or for specific people or kingdoms or anything like that. They just kind of represent themes in church history. So somebody may look at the beast and they say, well, the beast can be any satanically inspired opposition to the church in any age. It's just a theme, right? Or they may look at the harlot, and the harlot represents the compromised church at any age, or every seal, every trumpet, every bowl, every plague, natural disaster. They just kind of represent things that God's using to kind of work out His plan. Now, what would be the weakness of this? Well, the weakness of this, number one, is it denies the very thing that this book says it is, right? What does this book say it is? It's a prophecy. It doesn't say it's an allegory. It's a prophecy. So if you take it this way and you start saying, well, it doesn't really mean that, you got to be very careful, because you are denying the very thing this book says. Basically, if you interpret this allegorically, you can make this book mean anything you want it to mean, and people do make it mean anything they want it to mean. At the end of the day, what you've got is just a mess of people's imaginations, and that has caused a lot of problems over the years. And so, by the way, I shouldn't have to tell you, we're not going to use that one, right? Honestly, if we're going to use that one, I could just give you the book and say, hey, go figure it out, right? You can do whatever you want to do, because I got no clue what it means if we're going to do that. So we're not going to use allegorical. The second method that some people use to interpret is called the historical method. Now, the historical method, still, its problem is it combines allegory with history. So when it looks at the book and it sees these different things, it says, well, that's symbolic, not of themes, but of real people and real events in history. So, for example, you may look in Revelation 2 through 3 and you'd say, well, these are symbolic of the 7 ages of church history. Or you might look at the seals in chapter 4 through 7, and you might say, well, that represents the fall of the Roman Empire. Or you may, the little scroll given to John in chapter 10 is a picture of the Protestant Reformation. Or the beast of chapter 12 and 13 represent Catholicism and the Pope. In other words, you're doing the exact same thing as the first people did. Instead of just saying it represents these big themes, you're actually saying, well, it represents this. I mean, I've seen people say, well, this passage in Revelation is the invasion of the Huns. This passage it refers to the spread of Islam. Or this passage represents the modern missionary movement. So, honestly, if I had to ask you again, what's the weakness of this? It's the same thing, right? You can make it mean whatever you want. And by the way, when people use this, they almost always interpret it through the context of their own history or their own culture, right? In other words, if I had used this method in the 10th century, then I would have interpreted it with everything that had happened before then. If I had used this method in the 15th century, I would have interpreted it using everything. Are you with me? So it's again, I shouldn't have to tell you we're not going to do this one either, because it's just guesswork. You can kind of make it mean anything you want. Now, there are 2 more. The third one is something called the preterist view or the preterist view. Now, the word preterist is the Latin word for past. Okay, that's how you can remember that. Preterist is the Latin word for past. These people say that everything that was written down was prophecy, but everything happened back in 70 A.D. In other words, everything that the book prophesies about has already been fulfilled in the past. Everybody with me? So they would say when Jerusalem fell to the Roman Empire in AD 70 and the temple was burned and everything was destroyed, that was what the book of Revelation was talking about. Now, the reason, here's why they believe this. Revelation 1:1 says this, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants the things that must, what? Soon take place. And they take that literally. If it had to be soon, then he meant soon. And we'll talk about that, by the way, when we get to it. But that's why they take that. They say, okay, he had to mean soon. And so from their viewpoint, John is writing to the church at the end of the 1st century. And he's in the middle of this persecution from guys like Nero and Domitian. They're persecuting the church. They're killing Christians. And John writes this to that age, to that era, so that they can survive and persevere under the persecution of the Roman Empire. And so they believe that all the events of Revelation, with the exception of the return of Jesus Christ, have already happened. That's called the preterist view. Did anybody even know that? Did you not know that even existed? A lot of you don't even know that exists. But that's their viewpoint. Now, there's a lot of problems with that, okay? And I'll show you some of these. One of this is because it had to have been, for that to have been true, the book of Revelation had to have been written before 70 AD. It had to happen before that destruction of Jerusalem. By the way, there's no evidence for that it was written before that time. All the evidence we have from church fathers and stuff said it was written at the end of the first century, not in the 60s or the 50s of the first century. The bigger problem they've got is there are so many things in Revelation that bear no resemblance to anything that happened in the past. So let me give you a couple. Revelation 9:18 says this: "By these three plagues, a third of mankind was killed." Well, let me tell you, a third of mankind did not die in 70 AD. It was a bad event. A lot of people died in Israel, but a third of mankind did not die. Or how about Revelation 16:3? He says, "The second angel poured out his bowl into the sea, and it became like the blood of a corpse, and every living thing died that was in the sea." Well, that didn't happen, right? That just didn't happen. I could go on, right? All these different things. So there's a real problem with that. Now, here's the problem. In order to get around those things, the preterists have to say, well, those are just allegory. Well, here we go again, right? We're right back to where we were before. Well, that didn't happen. That must be symbolic. And now you can make it mean anything that you want it to mean. It is a very inconsistent way to interpret Revelation. And again, so I know why they say it. I know why they think that, because again, they take this very literally, that these things must soon take place. And we will deal with that as we get into next week in chapter 1, verse 1. We'll talk about some of the some of the ways that we can read this. So we're not going to do allegorical. We're not going to do historical. We're not going to do preterist. That only leaves us with one option, and that's called the futuristic or the literal interpretation. Okay, and this is what we are going to use to interpret. This. Now, basically from the literal interpretation that we're going to use, chapter 4 through chapter 22 has not happened yet. Okay, all the prophecies in Revelation are still in the future. That's the way we're going to look at it. We're not going to look and say, this has already happened. No, everything is going to happen. Now, I'm going to ask Chuck to put this up. I've given you a little timeline here, and I'm going to see if they'll put this up on the big screen so you can see that. And we got it, Chuck? We'll give them 1 second. There you go. Hey, all right. So basically, what I want is a couple things I want you to see tonight. And we are living, Revelation 1:3 is the letters are written to the churches. This is where we are. We are in what's called the church age. So we would still be in Revelation 1 through 3. As we move along this timeline, there's coming a point where these other prophecies will begin to take place. Okay, none of them have happened yet, but they will happen as we go through. Now, we're going to look at some different timelines. Now, I'm going to give you a typical timeline. I'm not going to tell you if I agree with it or not. Okay, you got to stick around to figure that out. But this would be a typical timeline. For example, that Revelation 4 and 5, we see the rapture of the church. Revelation 6 through 18 is the 7-year tribulation. And then you've got Jesus' second coming, the 1,000-year millennial, the lake of fire, great white throne judgment, and then the new heavens and the new earth. So what I want you to see tonight, though, what's important is this is where we are. Okay? That's what I want you to see tonight. We'll as we move through it, we'll talk about some of the disagreement. All these things are going to happen, by the way. The question is the timing, and we'll talk about those things as we move through. But we are sitting right here in the church age, which means you still got time. Get ready, because Jesus is coming back, and you don't want to miss that, right? Okay, let's go back to the other one before that blows us away right there. So here's the good thing. Here's how we're going to do this, right? This method understands that there are symbols in Revelation, okay? There's a lot of symbols. But when we get to a symbol in Revelation, we're just going to interpret it in just the plain way that we normally do, okay? So let me give you an example. In English, we use the word star. And it can mean different things, right? I can say, did you see that falling star? Or I can say, man, she's going to be a star. Or that guy is a star, right? It's in the context that we interpret it. And I don't have to stop and explain it to you, right? You knew exactly what I meant when I said it because of the context. That's what we're going to do. When we get to Revelation, we're going to read it just like you read normal language. So if we come across a passage like this, Revelation 8:12 says the fourth angel blew his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, and a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, and so on and so forth. Well, we're just going to say, well, what does that mean? Well, it means exactly what it says, right? There's no indication of symbolism. You don't have to try to figure anything out. It just means what it says. The stars are literal stars because nothing in the context indicates that it's going to be anything else. So we just let the passage speak for itself. At the same time, we may run across that word again. For example, in Revelation 9:1, it says, the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fall from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. Now, we're going to stop right there and say, okay, well, that's not a star. That's a person or a being, right? By the way, I can't wait to get to chapter 9 and talk about the abyss. I was telling Lori about this tonight. You know, do you remember Jesus with the legion of demons? And he cast them out, and what they say? Don't send us to the abyss. Don't send us there. Send us anywhere. I will go into them pigs, but do not send us to that place. What is it about this place that they fear so much? We'll talk about that when we get to 9. Now, if you're asleep, wake up. Okay? This interpretation is the right way to do it. Okay? It's the only way to do it. But it has a weakness. Okay? And here's the weakness. An error that we have to be very careful of is becoming newspaper theologians. Right? And we try to take current events and jam them into the book of Revelation. Listen, in other words, even people who interpret it rightly, using the right method, we always think we're the ones living in the last days. Every generation thinks we're the generation. This is it. Look at that. It's got to be us, right? That's a weakness you need to be very, very careful of. If you don't hear me anything else tonight, listen to this. The purpose of prophecy is not to make you a prophet. The purpose of prophecy is never given to you so that you can then predict the future. That's not the point. That's not the point of prophecy. Don't try to take prophecy and make yourself into a prophet. So prophecy in Revelation is not given to us so that we can predict who the Antichrist is. It's not given to us so that we can predict who or what the beast is going to be. It's not given to us so that we can predict when the Lord will return. And you may say, well, I know that. Yeah, but look, people do it all the time. I mean, I can't tell you. Just Google how many dates have been predicted in the 20th century for the return of Christ. It'll shock you how many people predicted that Jesus would return in the 20th century. And it will blow your mind how many there are. And we know we're not supposed to do it, but yet we seem to just can't help ourselves. When certain leaders come to power, we see nations go into war, Russia and Ukraine and Iran and Israel and AI, right? And we're just like, oh my, this is it. This is it. They thought it was them, but it is us. It's got to be. We cannot help ourselves from doing that. So I want to warn you, and again, I just did a quick Google search out there, and I just run across this, right? AI, the coming Antichrist. I mean, it's everywhere out there. I mean, you can find article after article that says, I ran across another one today. AI, this is it. And by the way, do I think AI will play a part? Absolutely. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I saw it this past year. Remember when Israel bombed Iran? Everybody came in, y'all were nervous as house cats. I saw it. Everybody was like, oh my gosh, this could be it, right? This could be the big one. That we just can't help ourselves. We do that. COVID, right? Remember back in COVID, there's a million of them images right there. Is COVID a sign of the end times, right? We all just thought this has got to be it. The cashless society. Every day we go and we see Bitcoin and we see, I would have never as a kid thought that, envision where we are today. But now a cashless society is right around the corner. I mean, it's obvious, it's coming. And they're going to know who you are, and they're going to be able to stop you from buying just like that. It'll be as easy as pie. There's a reason. I remember reading, I was telling someone today, I remember reading Revelation as a kid, and I remember the two prophets are killed and their bodies are laid out in the streets, and it says the whole world looked on them. And I thought, well, that's impossible. But it's not anymore. It's not anymore. Everybody can see what's going on at any time in any place. So do I think all of those play a role? Absolutely they do. God is putting things together. Technologies and different things are coming into place. That's logical, right? God doesn't just snap his finger and everything change overnight. It takes time for things to come into place and be put onto the stage of history. So yes, I do think all of these times. But when we see things like that, and this is my warning, know that the day is near. But also know that those things can wax and wane. Things come and things go. COVID is here, and then 5 years later, we're still here. Right? Things change. You can never be sure of the time. Let me give you an example of this. 1948, Israel becomes a nation. Right? 2020, COVID. We tend to grab these things and think, boy, this is it. You know, Hal Lindsey said before the year 2000, Jesus was coming back. And he built that off of Israel becoming a nation. He said in the next 40 years, he will return. But he didn't. He was wrong. And other people have looked at all this stuff and said, you got to be very careful. Here's something to remember. For those of you that think COVID is a sign of the end times, in 1918, COVID, by the way, killed 7 million people. In 1918, the same year, World War I was still going on. The Spanish flu killed 50 million people. Okay? Now, do you think those people might have thought the world is at war? The Spanish flu is killing 50 million people? Do you think they might have said, my gosh, guys, this is it? But we're 100 years past that. Right? Be careful. That's all I'm saying. Don't be a newspaper theologian or a newspaper prophet. Don't think. Things come, things go. So when we see things, all we can say for sure is I look at technology like a phone or the cashless society, or I see things like COVID, I can say, you know what? This is what it's going to be like. I can see how those things can be used. I can see how God is putting pieces in place for the end times. But it doesn't mean that it's here. And you need to be very, very careful of going down those roads or buying into people. That you can get on there today and you can get on YouTube or social media and you'll find there's no shortage of people that's got predictions, and be very careful about that stuff. That is not what the book of Revelation is given to us for. So this is my warning. Even though we're going to interpret it correctly, we're going to use the only method that we can. Remember, prophecy is not given to us so that we can make predictions. That's not the point of it, okay? So, that raises a good question. What is the purpose or the point of prophecy? I want to give you a little bit about prophecy. Let me tell you what prophecy is about, first and foremost. Prophecy is given to us to demonstrate the accuracy of the Bible. Prophecy is given to us. Listen, you can look at all the religious writings in the world. You can look at the Quran, you can look at the Book of Mormon, you can look at the Hindu scriptures, you can look at whatever you want. There is nothing like the Bible. It's not even close. Okay, many of those books don't even have any prophecies. The Bible has them over and over and over again. Let me tell you, the prophecies of the Bible stand as one of the great evidences that this is God-breathed, that this is God-inspired. If you have trouble understanding that this is the Word of God, then I encourage you to look at the prophecies. Look at some of the prophecies. In fact, I thought what I would do tonight, I talked about this back in my Christmas message, but I'll just go over it very quickly. This is exemplified, or example of it is Jesus himself. The Bible contains, conservatively, 300 prophecies about Jesus, and every single one of them written probably anywhere from 400 to 1,000 years before he was born. I'll give you a few. He would be a descendant of Abraham. He would be from the tribe of Judah. He would be from the house of David. He would be born in Bethlehem. He would be born of a virgin, called out of Egypt, enter Jerusalem on a donkey, betrayed for 30 pieces of silver. His hands and feet would be pierced. Lots would be cast for his clothes. None of his bones would be broken. He would say, my God, why have you forsaken me? He would die with sinners, be buried with the rich. He would be resurrected and ascend into heaven. I could just go on. There would be the killing of the children in Bethlehem. He would be preceded by a forerunner. He would live in poverty. He would preach in parables. He would be rejected by the Jews, betrayed by a friend, and forsaken by his disciples. He would die with intense suffering. He'd be struck on the cheek. His visage or his face would be marred. He would be spit upon and scarred, mocked. A drink of vinegar and gall would be offered to him. By the way, that's all prophesied. Centuries before Jesus. You got to deal with that. I don't care who you are. You've got to deal with how can the Bible make such accurate predictions, not vague, not general, but down to very specific details that are all fulfilled. So that's the first thing. It's to prove the accuracy of the Bible. Here's another reason for prophecy, and that is it brings us comfort by revealing the plans and purposes of God. Let me tell you, I mentioned earlier, I remember back this year when Israel bombed Iran, and then Iran was sending the missiles into, and everybody got real nervous, and I could see it. I think I even got up here one day and addressed it. I could just tell people were really nervous. And there's a tendency to become anxious when we see things that wars and rumors of wars. When you, let me tell you, just sit down and watch a video on somebody that knows something about AI and you'll be terrified. It'll terrify you. That's natural for us to be scared like that. Or just look at our country. And I mean, you know, what's going on in some of these places and cities, and you guys know all about that. I mean, it makes us anxious for ourselves. It makes us anxious for our children and for our grandchildren, does it not? That's natural. Let me tell you, when I open this book and I read these prophecies that were made 1,000 years ago, and they're brought to pass, I know that my God is in control. It just reassures me. It reassures me that God is, listen, He's carrying out His plans. He's carrying out His purposes. I don't care what Satan tries to do. I don't care what the nations try to do. I don't care. He is going to do what He said He's going to do. And that brings me great comfort, and fulfilled prophecy is part of that. Let me tell you something else. Number 3, it is designed to promote holiness. Okay, if you don't, again, I said this earlier, so if you don't walk out of here with 2 things, remember this one as the second one. You go back in the Bible and you check all the passages about the return of Jesus. And I will tell you, almost without exception, it's used as a basis to turn around and say, knowing that, walk worthy. Knowing that, be ready. Knowing that, walk in holiness. Let me give you an example. 2 Peter 3:10-11. Peter says, the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done on it will be exposed. Since all these things are thus to be dissolved, what sort of people ought you to be in lives of holiness and godliness? I mean, he's telling us these things are going to happen. Now go walk worthy. Live a life of holiness and godliness, because you know, I've already told you he's coming. I've already told you this is all going to pass away. Follow him. Be ready for him. Number 4, the reason for prophecy. It is designed to reveal the beauty and majesty of Jesus Christ. Okay? It's designed to reveal him. Revelation 19:10, John says, I fell down at his feet to worship him, talking about an angel. But he said to me, you must not do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers who hold to the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. In other words, that's what prophecy is all about. The spirit of prophecy is to point us to Jesus. The spirit of every prophecy in some way, shape, or fashion is to point us to Jesus Christ. In Luke 24:44, Jesus said to them, these are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled. So when we go and look at prophecy and fulfilled prophecy, or even unfulfilled prophecy that hasn't been fulfilled yet, we know somehow, some way, it's pointing us to Jesus. It's pointing us to the coming one. So let's always remember that, especially in Revelation. This is the revelation of Jesus Christ, which means not only is he the one giving it, it's all about him. It's the revelation of him, not just, so it's of him, from him, and about him. And this is, if you want to know about Jesus and where he is now and what he's getting ready to do and what he looks like, open Revelation. Open Revelation, because we're going to hear some incredible, incredible things. All right, here's my final thought. There's no doubt various views on Revelation. And there are going to be some things and which we probably can disagree on, but there are some things we agree on. Okay, let me just give you 5 things we can all agree on. Let me tell you, God is sovereign. Okay? Ultimately, when I read this book and I open this book and I read it, I know that it's God and God alone who's overseeing all of history. He is the one that's going to bring it to a conclusion in his timing and in his way, according to his plans and according to his purposes. We can all agree on that. We may not agree exactly when he'll do what and that kind of thing, and that's fine. But let me tell you, we all agree that he's the one that's in control and he's bringing it to a conclusion. Here's the second thing. Jesus is coming again. We can all agree on that. We may disagree about how or when or different things, but let me tell you, we all agree he's coming again. Number 3, there will be a resurrection from the dead and a final judgment. We all agree on that. Number 4, we all agree there will be a new earth where we will dwell with God and he will dwell with us. Not to be separated anymore. That is an incredible thing to look forward to. And let me tell you, number 5, chapter 1, verse 3, we read this just a few minutes ago. There is a promised blessing for those who will read and hear and study this book. Honestly, I never had any intention of teaching Revelation. For whatever reason, I always said this, I got enough problems today to worry about what's coming. I need help today living a godly life, right? So I wasn't overly interested in Revelation. But several weeks ago, I picked it up and I read it, and I come to verse 3. And verse 3 said, Blessed are those who read and hear this book and do what they find in it. And I thought, man, I'm missing a blessing. And you're missing a blessing if we don't get up and teach it. And so that day I decided, okay, I'm going to teach through the book of Revelation. So that kind of lays some foundations for it, how we're going to interpret it. Again, remember 2 things. Prophecy is not given to us to make us into prophets. Okay, be very careful of that. And like I said, we'll come back next week and we'll look at Revelation 1, verses 1 through 8. Let's pray. Father, Lord, we thank you for this night. We thank you for all those that have come out to hear this wonderful book. And Father, I got to admit to you, and you know this already because I've already told you, that I come into this with some trepidation. I come into this with not a whole lot of confidence. I come into this needing you to guide and direct me through this, Lord. And so as we go through this together, I pray tonight that this will be an incredible experience for all of us. And that at the end of the day, when we close that final chapter 22 and we shut the door on this, every single one of us will walk out of this room ready for Jesus to come back. Ready, not just ready, but looking forward to the return of our Savior. God, I'm praying and asking you in this study to do something mighty, to do something incredible, and I ask all of that in your precious Son's name. Amen.
Thank you again for watching our message from River of Life. If this message has touched you today, or if you need someone to pray with, please contact our office at 850-926-1200 or email us at info@rolcrawfordville.com. We also want to encourage you to visit us Sunday mornings at 10:30 or Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Please visit us at rolcrawfordville.com for more information and directions.